And thank all of you for coming out, and I normally roam the crowd, so I'm going to try to restrain myself here at the podium. But Mike and David asked me to talk a little bit about this topic. I've taught organizational behavior and cultural change management for organizations for over 35 years. In my institutions, 8 companies that I ran, one of the first things we talked about in orientation was cultural change and organizational change management. I've done it for the American Management Association. So we'll just jump in and sort of lead you through this. I'll start with a couple of slides if I can. Let's see here. So the first one is, we've been at this a long time, right? 2,500 years of recorded history. We've been thinking about change, and the bad news is we're still not particularly good at it. But anyway, we've been thinking about it. Jim Rohn, to lead others is to change their thoughts and beliefs and actions. And what I've found over the years, particularly with engineers, and I'm one twice over, so I can say this, is we tend to go right to actions. We want people to buy our product, to change our method, our process. You've got to realize, and the first thing, the predecessors are thoughts and beliefs. That's what you're really dealing with. We'll come back to that. Change is hard. People overestimate what they have today. They're comfortable. It's easy. They understand it, and they fear giving up, and they typically don't understand. You've got to bridge that value divide. You've got to make it clear. And I love Peter saying these people don't resist change. They resist being changed. People will change if you give them the right reasons, right? If you give them the right incentives. Todd Jick at Harvard says you have to be, your organization, just as comfortable with the status quo as you are. And once you do that, they'll readily change. So we'll come back to these in a little while. So wow, we're already getting deep in here. So let's do something that engineers love. And what engineer doesn't love a good equation, right? Get you warmed up, do something here. But this isn't just any normal equation. I've started every orientation session with this particular or a similar equation, and it's easy, right? This is not hard for anybody. But I add 3 other possible answers. And this used to be hard to do, to track people's responses with instantaneous recording and testing. This is trivial. And when you offer people those choices, here are the numbers. I've been doing this for about 15 years. 61% of the audience just seeing an equation is gone. They're not there. They're done. They don't like math. They hate math. They don't care. It doesn't matter to me. It's not going to affect me at all. And the ones that get it wrong, who think it's true, they self-assume that we're only talking about positive numbers. They limit their own ability to solve the equation by limiting their thought. They make assumptions. That's really good information to know, isn't it? Now let's do a little thought experiment with this group. What if I came in here and talked to you about that word? Check yourselves and ask who's still engaged. Or I started talking about a philosophical concept, or culture change, or the social sciences. I'm guessing that if I gave you those choices, the numbers would be about the same, right? Just a guess, and my 35 years of experience of doing this tells me that's absolutely true, right? It makes my head hurt. I hate philosophy. I took 1 course in college. I hated the professor, hated the whole thing, couldn't stand it. Now, we had an assumption about philosophers yesterday. Anybody come to the session yesterday, first session, show of hands? Remember the gentleman sat over here? What was his assumption about philosophers? Yep. Engineers go to the design board, scientists go to the lab, and philosophers go to Starbucks. And half the room agreed with him and laughed about it. Now, is that because they go to Starbucks because they're so smart they've already gotten all their work done and they're just relaxing? Or is the assumption because they don't have anything useful to do? I'll let you decide. But I'm guessing those numbers are about the same. So now let's use this thought experiment. What happens when you show up with this word tattooed on your forehead? And you give your organization these choices. Any guess? I'm guessing they're about the same, and experience tells me that's true, right? A bunch of them are saying, I'm not good at engineering. A bunch of them are saying, I hate engineering. Every time those people show up, something bad happens. Right? I don't care. Systems engineering doesn't mean anything to me. It's not going to affect me. Or I assume when this engineering shows up, it's going to be a total pain in my ass, right? And they're right. We are going to be a pain in. But anyway, so you've got to understand that's what you're dealing with. And people make these decisions instantaneously. Right? And we know that from the social sciences. We've done this. We added systems of this. I don't know what happens, but it probably doesn't get any better, right? It just makes people's head hurt. So you're dealing with biases and beliefs and assumptions and values. That's the coin of the realm in changing a culture, changing people's minds. And this happens instantaneously, as I said, and we know that. You go back to Charles Sanders Peirce, 1877, the fixation of beliefs. We are incredibly heedless of how we form those beliefs, yet we will defend them to the death, and the only time we're interested in changing is when we're uncomfortable, and we don't want to be uncomfortable, so we go right back to what we already believe, right? Edward de Bono, if you've read any of de Bono's Thinking Hats or Six Hats, etc., same thing. We think only so we don't have to think any further. That's as far as we go. We do it for efficiency, but we don't do it often, we don't do it well. Daniel Kahneman, if you've read that, Thinking Fast and Slow, right? System 1 is a rapid response engine based on our biases, our assumptions, our prior beliefs, our prior experiences that kicks in instantaneously. And we only use System 2 when we're forced to think deeply about something. Again, not often and not well. James Reason, Reason in Human Affairs, if you've read it, same thing. The mind is an if-then engine. And we do this for efficiency, folks, right? Back in the jungle, if you saw a lion and thought, well, gee, I wonder what that really is. I'd like to explore a little closer, right? So the human mind is designed to make these quick decisions, and they're all over your organization, particularly when you show up with engineering. And then finally, I'm not a big fan of it, but Malcolm Gladwell, same thing, that we're experts. We've traversed a path, and the novices following behind us, they don't see the world at all the same way we do. And you've got to understand that. So let's go back. So Alfred, said that beliefs are not adequately coherent or consistent or clear or conscious. Right? We're incredibly heedless about those beliefs. We don't even know where they came. And I'll give you an example. Well over 70% of people cannot identify good reasons for why they are a Republican or a Democrat. When you probe them deeply, they have no idea how they got there. Most of them don't know the platform, they don't know the issues, they don't know the candidates, and they will tell you that's because my mom and dad were, or my fraternity brothers were, or my sorority sisters were. They have no idea how they got there. That's just one example. 27% of people walking the earth believe aliens regularly visit us. That's what you're dealing with, right? And then you take that to the organization, your enterprise, and the data's all in. It's the same thing. But there's some good news here, right? We're systems engineers, so we should see the totality of this, right? We should be able to get to the ends of this and explore it and help these people. The other good news is your enterprise is a system, right? So, hey, it's something we know. Bad news is not many CEOs or your peers or your colleagues or owners or venture capitalists or private equity folks think of the world that way. They don't view it. They don't have a worldview that says they're living in a system, right? And that's another survey I've done over the years. 100% will tell you their business is a system. Only about 10 to 12% have ever read any of the stuff we have about systems thinking, system dynamics, system sciences, and systems engineering. But that's an opportunity for us, right? That's what we're trying to do, is get into more of those. The bad news is changing people's minds in corporate culture is a bitch. That's a technical term for very, very hard. So just okay. So back to my equation. Notice that, folks, we are no longer in Kansas. This is not engineering stuff. You are deeply in the social sciences when you start messing with people's incentives and minds, et cetera. And you've got to get comfortable with that, and most engineers are not. We like efficiency, we like clarity, we like precision. That's not the human mind that you're dealing with. So let's, if you're familiar with an outlook, a worldview, this is what you're dealing with, a framework of ideas or beliefs forming a holistic description through which an individual group watches, interprets, and interacts with the world, a shared environment. That's what you're in. You're in a shared sociological environment. And to think that it's going to, everywhere you go, subscribe to engineering principles is just a fool's errand. You've got to believe in other disciplines. Webster's definition of an individual group, philosophy. Taking a systems approach is a philosophy. You've got to get people to view the world that way in your organization, and I can, trust me, not many do. You know this, right? You're running up against it. Now, if philosophy gives you a headache, call it conceptual engineering, a little softer, a little easier. Maybe you'll sleep better. But here's the news flash. If you go into Starbucks and say, I want to discuss philosophy, you might get some friends and a free cup of coffee. If you go in and say, I want to discuss conceptual engineering, you're going to get a table by yourself. You're going to be alone, right? It's just, so I'd stick with philosophy. So here are the roadblocks you're going to run into in your organization, right? A lot of these organizations, folks, they're successful or somewhat successful. They're successful enough to not have to change. So when you show up, there's like, I don't have to do it. I worked with a guy, did a leveraged buyout for him. He, $128 million company. I said, Jerry, you're leaving tons of money on the table. But he's walking home every night with $8 to $12 million a year. How much do you need? So he didn't care that he was leaving some stuff on the table. You've got to understand that. Egos and beliefs and fears, right? People are scared of this stuff. You've got to get over that. You've got to realize you're dealing with the mind. Theologies, I just wrote an article on this in systems engineering. This dense web of the sociologies in this sociological construct that you've got to chop your way through it and understand it. Incentives, got to take a look at those. The rat's always going to find the cheese. If I stood up here and I said, I'll give $1 million to every one of you who gets a PhD in a social science, I'm guessing I'd have a lot of converts to the social sciences, right? The default setting for your organizations, you know this, it's an if-then engine, is no, right? If it's comfortable in what they're already doing, the answer is yes. If it's anything different, it's going to be no, right? It takes 1,000 yeses in most organizations to get something accomplished. It takes one no at the C-suite to shut it down, or a division. And then finally, folks, engineers storming into the BD office and telling a bunch of BD people how they should do their job when you've never worked BD in your life just doesn't work. Imagine somebody coming into your office and saying, I don't know shinola about engineering, can't solve an equation, but here's how you need to think about this systems problem we have. Right? You wouldn't respond very well either. All right, so what should you do? I would suggest you inventory your beliefs and your assumptions before you go, sort of check your ego at the door. Don't reinvent the wheel here, folks. There's lots and lots of good stuff. I've taught in business schools for 30 years. We've done some great work here. We're still struggling with it, just as you are, but don't reinvent the wheel. Jiu-jitsu, use your organization's leverage against it. If they're already using Deming somewhere for statistical process control, point out that Deming was a systems guy. If they're already using Simon Sinek's Start With Why, point out why is the purpose. It's refining and clarifying the purpose of the enterprise, right? And that gets to requirements. So catch them where they're already using it. Partner with those people who are already thinking about these things, already doing these things. Listen. Let me run that thought experiment. All of you have studied reading, writing, probably public speaking. How many of you have had a course or read deeply in listening? Show of hands. That's about right. Usually it's about 15 or 20%. Anybody, the rest of you think it's an important skill? We're terrible at it. Absolutely terrible at it. Most of us listen, guilty as charged, with our response track running in the background, ready to deliver our payload. Right? That's not listening. Here's the Chinese symbol for listening. The mind is the smallest part. It should be quiet and receptive. Listen with your eyes and your heart for meaning. Empathic listening. We're not good at it. I would encourage you to think about that. Be humble. Right? You've got to be a little bit humble going in. There's some really smart people in your organization. They just don't think and believe what you do. Right? See if you can't get on the same page with them. Little technique that I've used over the years, learned years ago, is if you listen, if you use empathic listening techniques with your systems view, you can learn something about that individual's struggle with the system. And if you learn something, you can help them by pointing out how their connections and their relationships, second-order effects and feedback loops are affecting them. And if you help them, they'll ask you to lead them. They'll ask you to take where you want them to go. So let's learn to be both, love both the social sciences and engineering. This isn't an either-or situation, folks. This is a both-and. And we're smart enough to know that. We're systems thinkers. That's where we need to be. So with that, there's far greater numbers in here, so you can lynch me, throw me in the river or whatever, but it's been a pleasure.
So thank you very much.